President. This House is in session. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, May 24th, 2022 to be confirmed. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against it, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor. Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the President.
I am in receipt of a message from Her Excellency the President, dated 27th of May 2022. Dear Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform the Honourable the House of Assembly that with the approval of the Honourable Prime Minister, I shall be on vacation leave from 27th May to 18th June 2022. In accordance with the provisions of Section 33 of the Constitution, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Douglas Gibson will perform the functions of the office of the President during my absence. As the Honourable the House of Assembly will not be meeting prior to the start of my vacation leave, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you therefore please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honourable the House of Assembly when next it meets? Yours faithfully, the President.
Petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the first reading of the Pandemic Contribution Levy Bill 2022 and also the first reading of the Financial Services Commission Amendment Bill 2022, as well as the first reading of the Financial Services Commission Miscellaneous Provisions and Validation Bill 2022.
The question is that the aforementioned bills be read the first time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it.
Congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 5. In the name of the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the second reading of the Pandemic Contribution Levy Bill 2022.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to commence this debate on the pandemic contribution levy against international environment, sir, which continues to be quite uncertain, and the extent to which Barbadians are, like all citizens globally, having to face increased costs for almost everything under the sun, sir. I have to contextualize this debate in the context of us still in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic globally. But more importantly, sir, the impact that pandemic certainly has had on families across this country, but certainly, sir, families globally. And if you would permit me, sir, I have to give some further context because it is important to appreciate that the context in which this bill is being debated this morning, sir, has to be clearly articulated and understood, I believe, certainly by the general public. But I have to go back, sir, in order to come forward so that Barbadians have a greater appreciation for what the government has been faced with, certainly over the last 2 years, and to flesh out, sir, some of the important contributions, certainly, that persons in this country have contributed, certainly in the context of mitigating some of the worst effects of the pandemic. And there are many, sir, but I will take the opportunity this morning just to highlight a few, because the one thing that we in this place, sir, have all committed ourselves to doing is trying our utmost, sir, to create a better life for all of our people. And in the context of what we have experienced in the last 4 years, more has intensified certainly within the last 2, and the instance within which, sir, we've had to respond to another challenge in terms of the passage of Hurricane Elsa, sir. I believe that this government has led from day one with calm assurance, sir, under the leadership of the Honourable Prime Minister. And we started out, sir, 4 years ago. And if my memory is still with me, sir, I believe we are just about 4 days, today's the 3 days, sorry, past that first budget speech that we gave in the Parliament, sir, upon assuming office, where we set out, sir, where this government intended to move Barbados from what then, sir, seemed to be extraordinary challenges that we were facing at the time. And we came to office to give the country clear direction that we needed to rebuild the credibility of the government as it relates to the public finances. We need to rebuild buffers in relation to levels of foreign exchange in order to be able to help fuel growth in the economy. We needed to bring back a measure of fiscal responsibility, sir, to the country. And we started out, sir, responding to that because the members of the public would be all too aware that the provision of social services in this country, sir, had deteriorated to the point where transportation, garbage, water, all of the things that we have grown accustomed to, sir, had deteriorated to the point where we literally could not recognize Barbados from when we once knew. And we set about, sir, very clearly to bring back that fiscal discipline, to improve the provision of services to the general public. And I dare say, sir, that within the first 18 months, we achieved those things. It was not without difficulty. It certainly meant that all of us in the battle, I would say, had to put in, as the Prime Minister likes to say, those 18-hour days to make sure that no stone was left unturned to ensure that we can improve the lives for Barbadians. But it is important, sir, that I set that context Because whilst a lot has been said in the public, and certainly, sir, it's been wild. I must tell you, it's been wild. It is clear to me that persons who still aspire to lead this country still don't understand the very basic and the fundamentals, sir, about what is required for governing. But this government, sir, set about to bring back that fiscal discipline and responsibility to the management of our affairs, such that, sir, we were in a position to rebuild very quickly the foreign exchange levels in the country. And we were able to address the debt situation, sir, through the conclusion of the domestic debt restructuring at the end of September 2018, and then the foreign debt restructuring, the commercial debt, sir, by the end of December of 2019. And we were, during that time, able to restore some level of improvement, I mean, not some level, a tremendous level of improvement, sir, with respect to stopping the flow of sewage on the streets of this country, to purchase garbage trucks, sir, to make sure that Barbadians don't have to keep food in the fridge for weeks on end, sir, taking up space and energy which one could least afford these days. Equally, sir, the purchase of the electric buses for the Transport Board to transform the way that the operational needs of the Transport Board were under in the context of the high maintenance costs, sir. We did those things because we were able, sir, to address the problem as we saw it at the time. But what was also important, sir, and I want to make it clear that we built buffers, sir, buffers, in a sense, to withstand shocks, as we call them in economic terms, sir, external shocks. But certainly, sir, as we approached those first 18 months, we had absolutely no idea what was on the horizon. And you would forgive me, sir, because the economists like to forecast, but certainly nowhere on the horizon, sir, in any of the global models or anything of that nature, sir, was a global pandemic. And to the extent that our ability to withstand initially, sir, those immediate impacts was in part because, sir, the government had undertaken a very aggressive fiscal reform program, the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, in order to bring fiscal discipline and sustainability, sir, back to the management of the public finances. And I, sir, cannot communicate through you to the public how important those early decisions were, because for the life of me, sir, I was having a chat with one of the members earlier this morning, and I was referring to the fact that for the last 4 years, we have had challenges with respect to navigating what is certainly becoming a more uncertain world. But at no point in time, sir, really, have we had to really significantly worry about financing, sir, until the last 6 to 9 months after the impact of Hurricane Elsa. And I will come back to that later because it's important that people get an appreciation that the revenues that we collect every day, and I swear, sir, I hope that people would understand that when the pandemic hit, sir, and you've heard me say in this parliament that when the pandemic hit during 2020, sir, we lost, I say we, the government revenues declined by just about $600 million. You heard me say that on more than one occasion, sir. But what is very important to understand is that the economy, sir, declined by over $2 billion. Private sector activity, sir, declined by an estimated $2 billion during that particular year. And that manifested itself, sir, in the increase in unemployment claims, certainly to the National Insurance Fund. You've heard this before. But I want the public to just pause and just listen to me very carefully. Because you will recall, sir, that on the 1st of April 2020, when we were at the other place, I came to this Parliament, which is, as you would appreciate, sir, the first day of the financial year, to introduce supplementary, sir, to be able to make provision for the Adopt a Family program that we started, sir, because we had experience of few COVID cases in March of 2020. We've seen the rapid decline with respect and the cancellation of flights and the cessation of flights had started to kick in, sir. And we started on the very first day of that financial year, having to respond to social needs of ordinary Barbadians for whom, sir, the pandemic in those early days was obviously new, as it was for all of the world. But certainly, the government had to respond on the very first day of the financial year in order to make sure that we helped to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic as it was manifesting at that time. And you will recall, sir, I came to the Parliament to ask permission to spend or to allocate $10 million initially with respect to the Adopt a Family program, but equally, sir, to increase the welfare vote by a further 10 million in order to make sure that those persons who were the most vulnerable at that particular point in time, that we could respond as quickly as possible. And how were we able to do that, sir? Because the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central can attest that we had built, with the credibility of the program that we were undertaking with the International Monetary Fund, sir, we were able to crowd in loans, yes, from multilaterals, which gave us the space, sir, and the cash to be able to respond very quickly to what was a pressing need. And you would recall, sir, that during that estimates debate of 2020, that whilst the debate was going on and we were presenting what we had previously programmed, the evolution of the impact of the pandemic meant that by the end of that debate, we pretty much, the Prime Minister, as you recall, sir, literally had to announce new measures in order to make sure that we could respond to the crisis as it was at the time. And therefore, government's ability, sir, to finance and respond in terms of the building of Harrison Point, sir, you recall that emergency procurement was undertaken in order to make sure that we had a facility to be able to respond to the numbers that we were seeing in the context of what was happening globally. That was done, sir, to respond to the crisis. It had to be financed, certainly out of budget, completely, sir, not on the radar at the time, but we needed to respond to that. But government had the capacity and the ability, sir, to finance these responses. And you will recall, sir, that we created across a number of ministries, including the Ministry of Health and Wellness, COVID management programs, crisis management programs, I believe is the correct title, but I speak subject to correction now, sir, where we isolated specific funding for COVID-19 over the course of the last 2 years. Over and above, sir, the expenditure, certainly as it relates to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the like. But what is important, sir, is that the government responded at a time when Barbadians needed its government to respond. And sir, we had the capacity to respond because we took those early decisions in the first 18 months of our administration, sir, to right-size, in a sense, sir, the finances of government, which allowed us to be able to engage multilaterals, sir, in order to be able to make sure that those early investments and the early social protection measures could be undertaken in a timely manner, sir, in a timely manner, so that persons in this country, sir, will not suffer adversely or more than they needed to, because the government was able to step in the breach to be able to respond. What I want to also remind the chamber, sir, is that you would appreciate that in any normal year, sir, the national insurance scheme, and this is, when you say a normal year, sir, that seems such a long time ago. It seems like a lifetime. But the national insurance scheme, on average, would take in about 50-odd million or so in contributions with respect to unemployment benefit based on persons paying in the scheme, and will pay out probably about 30, 35, depending on obviously levels of unemployment in the economy. But once people are working, sir, contributions will be paid in. So naturally, when the pandemic hit, sir, as you would appreciate, unemployment went sky high, and the demand, sir, on the unemployment fund was such that any cash that the NAS had within the context of the unemployment scheme would have been depleted quite quickly, because with somewhere in the region of 52,000 claims, sir, which turned out to be particularly relevant for those about 33,000 people, meant that for the first time in the history of the country, the national insurance scheme had to respond to a significantly larger number of people unemployed in a very short space of time, which, as you would recall, sir, and you will forgive me, the specific clause of the NAS escapes me now, but government, sir, ultimately has a fiduciary responsibility that if the national insurance is unable at any point, sir, to pay its benefits, it means that government has to step in order to pay. And obviously, sir, these persons, having been clearly employed, national insurance contributions deducted from their salaries when the month come, entitled, obviously, to their unemployment benefits. And therefore, the government had to do some interesting financial arrangements with the NAS, because the NAS had to, you would recall, sir, and this is where everything is related. You would recall that when we came to office, the last government had not paid national insurance contributions for public servants for 3 years. So we had issued Series F bonds, you will recall, sir, to pay those national insurance contributions between 2015 and 18. So we had to prepare, in a sense, sir, some of those bonds in order, and this would have been to the National Insurance Fund, which then lent money to the unemployment fund, sir, to pay persons in the short term, obviously to make sure that for the 6 months that those persons were entitled to unemployment, that they got it. But that meant, sir, that we had to use cash that we had received through the various PBLs and financing that we got from, whether it's the IMF, IDB, CDB, CAF, you name it, sir, those funds, in order to advance those payments to the National Insurance Fund so that ordinary persons can get the unemployment benefit. But naturally, sir, as you know, when you lend something, you've got to pay it back. So if the National Insurance Fund lent the unemployment fund money, sir, and it had to liquidate, which means government had to pay off some of the bonds, to give it money, to give people, it still got to pay it back. And therefore, we've had to come up with a capitalization agreement, sir, with respect to just that aspect of the unemployment fund paying back the NIS with respect to that arrangement. All of this, sir, is cash. You would also recall, sir, that in September of 2020, we initiated the BEST program because we recognize, sir, that a number of our hotels, given where we were at the time and the uncertainty with respect to the resumption of international air travel, sir, you would recall that we established a program where we would give some working capital support to the hotel industry in order to avert in a sense, sir, these entities from going insolvent, because again, sir, the demand with respect to severance, potentially, on these entities, obviously would have meant that a number of businesses would have been incapable, which then, sir, of honoring the severance, which then would have placed an even bigger burden on the side NAS, sir, because if all of those companies, sir, suddenly had to ask the NAS to pay the severance on their behalf, then it meant, clearly, the government would then have to put more cash in order to do that. So we came up with a specific scheme, sir, the BEST program, to be able to help finance those operations of those entities, because we recognize, sir, that without those entities remaining sufficiently solvent, that when the pandemic subsided, we would not be able in a position to start to receive tourists in the way that we would like, and therefore we took a specific decision on that. But what that meant, sir, was that government had to use, again, some of its financial resources in order to do these things. And it is important that the public appreciates that government has been, throughout the last 2 years, responding to the macro condition of the country, but equally and more importantly, sir, to the lives and livelihoods of ordinary Barbadians in this country. But it has taken a toll, sir. It has taken a toll. And the extent to which we're here to discuss the debate, the pandemic contribution levy, sir, fits within that, because at the end of the day, one of the things that we are absolutely clear about, sir, is that we believe that the tax structure, as currently contemplated, is still relevant in the context of Barbados. We are confident that once growth returns, that the current tax structure is the appropriate one, notwithstanding the call for a global minimum tax rate for corporate entities of 15%. We are sufficiently confident that our tax structure meets the requirements of our public policy stance. But that aside, sir, I want to take the opportunity, sir, at this point, because you would recall, sir, all of us in those very, 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 very early days would have started to engage in the middle of the year, as you would appreciate, sir, in providing assistance to households in our constituencies as members of parliament. And obviously, it is something that we did out of instinct, because we recognize, sir, that people were hurting, having had their income opportunities come to a grinding halt. And as you recall, sir, those early lockdowns created a lot of uncertainty for persons in this country. Now, I want to take this opportunity, sir, in the context of speaking about the pandemic contribution levy, to thank those Barbadians, sir, who donated to the Adopt a Family program. And since March of 2020, sir, until April of 2022, we've had 771 persons, sir, in Barbados donate monetarily. And I know that there are thousands of people who have equally done stuff across the landscape of the country. But 771 persons, sir, donated directly to the Adopt a Family program, to the tune, sir, of $4,770,946, sir, and 77 cents, which, sir, is on top of the $20 million a year that the government put in over the last 2 years to be able to help families, sir, in this country survive what clearly has been a very, 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 very difficult time. But, sir, I want to, with your permission, sir, also thank the Sandy Lane Charitable Trust, sir, who in May of 2020 donated some $6 million, sir, in vouchers, which all of us as MPs distributed certainly to persons across this country. And I really want to thank them, sir, again, on behalf of the government and the people of Barbados, because they rose to the occasion, sir, at the time in the heat, sir, in the heat of the battle, so to speak, when there was the greatest uncertainty. Also, sir, Mr. Derek Smith on the Tanglewood Family Trust also donated just under $10 million with respect to vouchers and the like, sir. And the truth is, sir, that these contributions came on top of all of the other contributions that churches and other clubs in this country, sir, also were executing within communities. And the extent, sir, to which these contributions were able to help ease what the government was doing, what private individuals were doing, sir, I think is part of the pandemic response and the natural instinct, sir, to help ordinary people, which I think the one thing that this pandemic certainly has taught all of us, sir, that we are all equally vulnerable, and the extent to which you can help your neighbor, it is important to be able to do so. And therefore, these contributions, sir, these contributions, in a sense, represent the spirit of what I believe the Prime Minister meant in, by her phrase, each one touch one, because it is important, sir, that as a society, that we never, ever, ever allow, sir, persons to fall through the cracks, and therefore it is this spirit of giving, sir, that I want to applaud these entities and all those other persons for whom I may not be able to call your name, but to say thank you that over the last 2 years for the work and support that you've given to this country, because without that support, Mr. Speaker, I can't tell you where Barbados would have been, certainly in the last 2 years. And so, with that said, sir, I turn my attention to the bill now, because since the Prime Minister announced this, sir, and I can tell you that we've had several meetings with representatives of the affected business community. And you will recall, sir, that we have indicated that the purpose of this pandemic contribution levy is to help finance our way through this fiscal year. It is a financing mechanism, sir, specifically, which is why it is one-off in the context of this fiscal year. As I reiterated earlier, sir, we are sufficiently comfortable that once growth returns to the economy, that the current tax structure, as articulated, is sufficient to be able to take us forward. And that's why we've been pushing to get a lot of the capital works executed, to get growth going in the economy, to get more activity going in order to get us out of the hole that we are in. Of course, the war doesn't help in terms of the escalation of that, sir, but that too, with respect to our call for all persons to participate where they can at this time with respect to renewable energy, it is important that we are able to bring that to reality, because as you would appreciate, with every spike in oil prices, it means then that obviously we are using more foreign exchange, sir, effectively to buy the same gas, the same diesel, and not adding necessarily, sir, adding anything new to the equation. And therefore, the need to push for renewable energy and to use the foreign exchange, said, to pursue growth and renewable energy opportunities would be a much more productive use of the foreign exchange than letting it just flow, sir, with respect to fossil fuel. And therefore, I cannot emphasize how important that is from a business perspective, from an individual perspective, notwithstanding, sir, that we've just come through a very brutal 2 years of the pandemic. We must dig even deeper now, because the world is indeed at war, and therefore, by our estimation, this measure is intended to help us to close the financing gap with respect to this fiscal year in order to see our way through the end of the pandemic. So, sir, the Clause 3 says the purpose is for mitigating the adverse economic impact of the spread of the coronavirus, but really, it really is part of a financing package, sir, with respect to us being able to close the financing gap. Now, The companies for which the levy, sir, and we take the opportunity to remind the chamber, for the application of the levy, you have telecommunication companies, life and general insurance companies, sir, major engaged in the sale of fuel, commercial banks, sir, that would have had net income of $5 million or more in the financial year 2020 or in the financial year of 2021. And for individuals, sir, employed, who may have an income of $6,250 or more per month between April 1st, sir, 2022 and the 31st of March 2023. And an individual, sir, employed in Barbados who does not ordinarily have an income of $6,250 or more per month or $75,000 or more per year, but in any month has an income of $6,250 or more for the period April 1st to the 31st of March 2023, or for the period April 1st, 2022 to 31st of March 2023 has an income of $75,000 or more. Now, let me be clear, sir, because, you know, it is important to remind persons that whilst, and let me just indicate very at the outset, the rate for companies, sir, is 15%, the rate for individuals, 1%. The extent, sir, to which it is our desire for this not to be certainly to make it any more of an administrative burden. And the reason that the clauses are written the way that they are written is that we know that sometimes, sir, people like to play around with the numbers when the month comes, depending on whether you're, some people, sir. It's part of the, regrettably part of what happens from time to time. But the reality of the situation, sir, is that we feel that the application with respect to this very narrow space reflects, sir, when we look at the data and recognize that these entities were perhaps the least disrupted during the pandemic, certainly made the most money during the pandemic, and therefore if one looks at and this is not to say that these entities did not make contributions during the course of the pandemic. But in order for us to be able to close the gap, sir, it is important that we understand that the use of the period of the pandemic to determine the level of contribution is the only relevant consideration in the context of any levy, even though for individuals it is going forward and in the context of being able to determine it on the basis of, for companies, that it refers to the income years 2020 and 2021. The reality of it, sir, is that numerically, had we included income year 2022, which is a much better year for all of them, they would actually would have been paying slightly more in terms of the levy, but we recognize that the period for which we were focused on is really the financing period that the government of Barbados had to do the extraordinary financing of all of those programs that I articulated, sir, with respect to the response to COVID-19, and therefore the levy is intended to help us, close this financial year. The perspective in the context of its application is that when we reviewed the level of income for all of the companies across the two financial years, sir, we recognize that there were some who did okay, sir, who did okay. And these measures now will not in any way impair or impact their ability to operate. It does not make any of them any less competitive in the context of their operations for the current year. And therefore, it is important that we recognize now that we have to all play our part with respect to being able to get the country stable. As I indicated, sir, we have met with some of the affected companies, And we impressed upon them that really and truly, sir, that one, Barbados' sole asset really, in a real sense, is stability, sir, stability. And therefore, having done all that we can do, sir, within the context of maintaining social stability, sir, throughout this entire pandemic, and the government will continue to focus a lot on that, sir. We reminded them that the greatest threat, sir, to any investment, any part of the world, sir, is instability. And therefore, we feel that it is responsible to be able to do this now in order to make sure that we can help hold the country together and to allow the government to focus then on the improvement of some of those services, which we know we had intended to start to focus on during 2020, but we had to delay because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The levy, sir, also refers to, or applies to self-employed persons. And clause 4D, it speaks to the self-employed individual who has income of $75,000 or more for the period April 1st, 2020 to 31st March, 2023. And let me pause at this point, sir, and remind all self-employed persons, let me just remind them, sir, that during the pandemic, when the lockdowns were in place, sir, that the government, working with the NAS, introduced the business interruption benefit at the NAS, which was a benefit that was not there before, but we recognize that obviously as self-employed persons, if you were making your contributions as you were over the years, the fact that you were not able to work because of the lockdown and all of that, the government, working with the NAS, introduced that benefit so that persons could still have some monies available to them at a very critical time. And therefore, I say to all self-employed persons, particularly those who benefited from the business interruption benefit, that this is not the time now, sir, to play with the numbers. Because when we were all at our most vulnerable, the taxpayers and the government of this country made sure that there was some relief for you then. And this is a small contribution now with respect to the 1% for the self-employed person, just to give back a little piece, Mr. Speaker, because at the end of the day, if we're all in it together, then we all got to put in something in the pot, sir, so that when you take out later, that there's something to take out, sir, at the appropriate time. And I say so without reservation, sir, because if you don't put something in the pot, sir, then you really can't expect reasonably to be the first in line when the pot's sharing. So I appeal to all self-employed persons to be honorable and do the right thing with respect to the application of this levy, because this is not the time now for persons and to be playing around with numbers, as I would say. Naturally, sir, the levy does not apply. I'm hearing a slight echo. The levy does not apply to persons on the welcome stamp, as you would appreciate, sir, because the terms of their ability to work in Barbados is quite different. They're paying taxes, obviously, in their jurisdiction of work. They just happen to be working remotely here. A qualified person who has been granted a foreign currency permit, sir, under the Foreign Currency Permits Act, and obviously diplomats in terms of the diplomatic immunities and privileges with respect to that. The truth is, sir, that we have entered a phase of this, you might wish to call it the post-pandemic phase, or I don't know how quite to describe it, sir, but let's refer to it as the post-pandemic phase, where the economy has not yet fully recovered in the way that we would like. There's still too many persons, sir, who have not returned fully to work. So people are still working 32 hours, some 28, sir, 3 days a week, 4 days a week. So it's not yet fully back to where we would like. By the same token, you're seeing increases in costs, obviously, which is making it difficult for persons in their everyday life, sir. And therefore, the timing, and this is in part due to the logistics issues that we're experiencing globally, but the uncertainty, sir, is really being driven by the war in Ukraine and the extent to which our ability to finance our way through this process. The government has already, in the budget, as you would recall, sir, we've already capped the levels with respect to what we will calculate for freight. We've capped the level of the VAT on both gasoline and diesel. But as the point we made then, sir, is that if the underlying cost of commodities obviously continues to rise, sir, beyond reasonable levels because of the way the markets are responding, we then must make sure that, which we've tried to do, is to limit the amount of taxes that we take, but recognize that we're going to have to make some strategic decisions about how we trade and who we trade with. And the government has already started to do some very aggressive work right within the context of the region in order to be able to respond to that. And therefore, I'm urging Barbadians that we must give this the best shot of working, because in the short, medium to long term, this is where we are going to see overall benefits for the country. It is an extremely difficult period that we are experiencing at the moment. We would all like the war to end tomorrow, sir. We would all like the logistics supply issues to resolve. China is still not open fully, given its manufacturing power globally. And therefore, these are factors that are creating issues for transportation, for product availability, the disruption in the supply chain, sir. These are real issues that are facing every country globally. And therefore, I say to Barbadians that the government will do its utmost best to try to shield you from as much as we can. But the reality is that when you go to New York or London or any place now, sir, with your family, and you don't even have to go, you just talk to your family in over and away, as we would like to say, sir, and you will realize that they too are indicating the same things that we are experiencing here in Barbados. And therefore, it is not that the government is being wicked or malicious or anything, sir, with respect to what we are doing. We have a certain suite of public services, sir, that we have committed to providing the country that requires, sir, a certain level of revenue to provide. Yes, sir, we paused some of the reforms 2 years ago because of COVID-19, but we now recognize, sir, that we have to redouble those efforts to improve the quality of those services that are being delivered to the public, and we are committed to doing that. But I want to say to Barbadians, through you, sir, that we have heard, and I must acknowledge that we have been written by members of the labor unions with respect to requesting a salary increase. I've seen some commentary, sir, within the context of the media, which is quite interesting. But let me suffice it to say, sir, that the government and the economy, as it stands right now, sir, financing government's program at this particular point in time, sir, is a challenge. It is a challenge, sir, because over the course of the evolution of the pandemic, we moved from responding to the medical side of the pandemic to the social side of the pandemic, sir, with respect to the increase in unemployment, as I indicated, sir, very quickly. And then, sir, Barbadians will be reminded that we saw some critical surges in numbers with respect to COVID-19 at the beginning of 2021, sir. Then in the summer of 2021 with the Delta variant, sir. And with each surge in cases, sir, the Ministry of Health required more cash, sir, to respond to COVID-19. Then last year, sir, we had the Hurricane Nelson. That's why I told you earlier, sir, that the last 6 to 9 months has been the most difficult period for financing government's operation, because on top of responding to the COVID matters, we then had to turn around, sir, and use cash again, financing, sir, to respond to the housing issue caused by Hurricane Nelson. Now, any one of these events, sir, is enough to cause you and I, sir, to lose a few hairs on top of our heads, sir. But the reality is that we've been faced with these two things, plus now, sir, an escalation in prices driven by external activities, which we've already put some measures in place, sir, to try to respond to. And all of this, sir, in the context of an economy that is still not fully back to pre-COVID-19 levels. And therefore, our push and focus really on trying to find some level of balance, sir, between pushing with respect to activities that will drive growth, that will bring back full employment. And I say full employment meaning, sir, that people are working a full 35 or 40-hour week, even overtime in some instances. But the point is, until we get people back to that full employment level, sir, then obviously, naturally, cost of living issues will continue to be a concern. But as I indicated, sir, I remind the public that as the economy has been steadily reopened and is gaining momentum, then we anticipate that many, within the context of the private sector, that activity will then translate into full employment and obviously greater level of wages with respect to persons take-home pay when the week or when the month comes, sir. This, sir, is how we are looking to focus within the context of the next few months on growth, sir, within the context of the domestic space, in spite of the uncertainty that is being faced globally. And to the extent that Barbadians, sir, can help with that specific transition, it is important. And I know that certainly the member for St. Philip South and the work that the Ministry of Agriculture is doing, sir, with respect to getting Barbadians, literally, sir, to increase production across all sectors, sir, notwithstanding that we've had to do some limited subsidies within the context of keeping feed prices down and these types of things, sir, and finding alternatives. The reality is that the behaviors, or not behaviors, but the way business has been transacted within the context of the economy, private sector, sir, we know we have been examining those and trying to make sure then that we can make the best decisions in the interests of Barbadians, but certainly in the interests of the country, in order to get us through this very, very difficult time. The reality, sir, is this year is going to continue to be a challenge as long as the war escalates. Luckily, sir, we've seen in recent days and weeks, we've seen an ease, if you like, sir, with respect to COVID as it relates to in the country. But whilst that is good on the one hand, the lag with respect to the full economic recovery is still there. And therefore, we are trying to make sure that as we recalibrate, if you like, sir, to refocus our efforts within the context of the provision, the improvement in provision of those public services, that we can, it is my hope that we can wind down, sir, those programs as it relates to COVID, wind down, because vaccinations and everything has gone reasonably well in the country, barring any new variant, sir, that comes up and creates any greater uncertainty with respect to that. I'm hopeful that we can transition out of COVID-19, get our systems back to normal, get the private economy, sir, back on track such that our focus on getting double-digit growth this year is realized and gaining momentum into next year, because it is these things, sir, that are going to bring the greatest benefit to Barbadians in the short, medium, and certainly the long term. And whilst the pandemic contribution levy today is to help us bridge this gap, we are still very confident, sir, that the tax structure, as I indicated earlier, is fit for purpose. And so, sir, I just wish to speak very quickly to clause 13, particularly as it relates to the payments and the dates for companies, because whilst individuals, as you would appreciate, sir, as employees, every month the monies will be deducted from our payroll and goes into the Revenue Authority. For the companies, the first, I'm referring specifically, sir, to clause 13.2. So each company will be required to pay each income year in 4 installments. For income for the financial year 2020, the following dates are required for payment for the income year of 2020, which is the 15th of July 2022, 15th of August, 15th of September, 15th of October. Now, I say this is the law, but if there are companies out there who wish to prepare all one time, then please do. Because at the end of the day, sir, as I said, this is a financing mechanism to allow us to help push and keep the economy stable. For financial year 2021, sir, the 15th of November, 15th of December, 15th of January 2023, and the 15th of February 2023 are the dates for which the monies for income year 2021 are due. And the extent to which, sir, that this is so, this then allows us, sir, on the basis of our assessment and our calculation, to be able to improve the cash flow, certainly of government, over and beyond, sir. And I know that tomorrow is June 15th is, there's a filing date for corporate tax. But the reality is that this is designed specifically to help, as I said, as a financing mechanism through the rest of the year, in order to help government bridge the gap with respect to financing. So, sir, these are interesting times that we've been called to serve. And 4 years, some 4 years in, sir, I think I've seen a lot. I can't say everything, but I've seen a lot. And the extent to which I believe we were called for the times, clearly we have responded. And I believe that the people of this country, sir, understand and appreciate the complexity, if you like, within which we are operating. I had hoped that this year would have been relatively benign. Obviously, the war has put that into doubt. I know that we are at the beginning of the hurricane season, and I hope that we don't have any storms or anything to deal with this year, sir, because we have experienced an extraordinary, sir, 4 years since coming to office. And whilst I know that we have risen to the challenge every time, and we will continue to do so, sir, I want to urge Barbadians to let us do that which we can do now to build resilience within our own spaces, to help us mitigate those costs. And I say to the business community, make the investments in the renewable energy, because it just makes sense to address the underlying costs of providing goods and services to the public so that we can make things more affordable in the country. And to the extent that these things, and government is prepared to assist where we can, we will certainly do, but we must do the things, sir, that make sense. Do the things that make sense, and I believe that collectively we will all get out of this situation faster. We have to make the transition, sir, and do so quickly across every sphere, but I'm just conscious, sir, that after a grueling 2 years, that households and businesses, sir, are still a bit soft with respect to their financial circumstance, but to the extent that we can still make those critical interventions, sir, with respect to how we operate, what we consume, the manner in which we provide the services to the public. Government certainly will continue to focus on its digitization and its online provisioning and improvement of the face-to-face services with the public. We must continue, sir, to hold each other accountable with respect to improving these services. And I ask, sir, that all citizens take to heart that government's efforts, not just to digitize, is not intended in any way, sir, to disadvantage. It is simply to help reduce the costs of providing those services, reduce the waiting time, sir, with respect to lining up to pay for these services. And as each government department, sir, gets its online provisioning together, that we continue to work through whatever issues we need to work through in order for all of us to benefit. And therefore, sir, this pandemic contribution levy will go a long way to help us to finance, as I said, sir, close the gap this year with respect to government's operation. There's not much more, well, there's a few more things I could raise, but I will leave that perhaps for another time. But I wish to say to all of the impacted companies that you've seen the record of this government over the last 4 years with respect to fiscal discipline. And therefore, I give the assurance from this place that this specific measure is a one-time measure with respect to this financial year. There may come a time with respect to review of taxation, given what's happening globally with the minimum tax rate, that there may be other discussions about tax, but we are comfortable with respect to our convergence levels that we took in December of 2018, sir, and where that has landed the business community in Barbados. And therefore, it is an extraordinary effort. It has been a Herculean effort for government over the past 2 years to respond to a myriad of challenges, very, very, very complicated and interconnected, some still to be resolved within the context of a fiscal consolidation program. Without doubt, sir, we have been able to work with the International Monetary Fund and other funding agencies, sir, to adjust our program to suit the circumstances that we were faced with. And I am confident, sir, that with this measure, and hoping that I'm knocking on wood, sir, that there are no more disruptions or uncertainty for the remainder of the year, that we will be in a position, sir, to start to see some significant growth in the economy this year and next year, such that Barbadians can get back to work in full, sir, and be able to allay their fears with respect to financing their lifestyles. And with those very few words, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I rise at this time to support this pandemic contribution levy. And the question is why? Because I sit with the government and part of the government, I support the government, but that is not the reason why, sir. The reason is simply because this is part of a mindset and part of a direction that we have to take the nation to and through at this point in time. A point in time when we hear what we would consider in past as a cliche, we are in this together. But the reality now is that this must no longer be seen as a cliche, but be seen as an ideology and a philosophy in order to get through times like these. Queen Ifrika has a song, "In Times Like These," and it reminds me very much of where we are today. For the past 4 months, experiencing Barbados as a representative and member of parliament has caused a speech to be bubbling up in me like a Bajan soup. And the speech in me that is bubbling up, sir, is an explanation of how the country that has looked after each and every one of us, from cradle to grave, from education to elder support in this nation, and what it is calling for us to do today, to do to know. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is my intention in my support for this levy to do what I usually like to do, which is to break down to the average man what the levy and what the legislation and what all of this talk is about. Because at the end of the day, we are here to represent the people. And I think it is important that the people understand and connect with what we are doing. I feel part of an energized government, an energized legislative, an energized executive. But at the end of the day, I want to feel that energy coming from the private sector, the business sector, the public sector, the workers, every citizen in Barbados, because we are in this together. If only us in here feel the energy and the vision, we've already lost the battle. So my support for this levy this morning, sir, is really to demonstrate that not just only by talk, but by action, that we will put measures in place to ensure that we are in this together. There is a lot to be said, sir, but there's so much more to be done. And we're doing it today by bringing one of those mechanisms through the Ministry of Finance to ensure that one of the other sectors can now contribute to the recovery of the post-pandemic Barbados. Over and over, sir, we are hearing about the turmoil in our globe, in our earth, in our world, in our country. We've heard about the pandemic, the climatic, even the volcanic had to get involved, and then President Putin, he had to bring in the dramatic. He introduced now a war on top of all of these things that we must now respond to. But I want to put this in a Barbadian context because Barbados has a very special model. Sometimes we try to compare ourselves with other similarly sized countries without recognizing that our economy from all back 60 years plus have been just designed different. Barbados is known as a high-end destination. It has a high cost of living. Some people call it the cost of high living. But others will recognize that it is really a high cost of living jurisdiction because it has a high standard of living for many. What we are experiencing now, though, is really a higher cost of living because of external shocks and then a lower standard of living. So then that would increase the pain of the residents here. Just like a middle-income family feels shocks at a different level, and I'm going to put that in context, sir. A middle-income country feels shocks at a different level. And what do I mean by this? A lot of times when we respond to situations like these, we think of the most vulnerable, and we work with the most vulnerable, because those are the ones most exposed by these external shocks. A lot of the time, we don't have to worry about those at the top, because even with a reduce in income or revenue, because of their wealth, they are able to survive and still thrive. But who's usually left out? Those at the middle who still feel a lot of shock and a lot of pain, and that is what is happening to us as a nation, in my opinion, sir. Now, one of the things that I commend this government for is that we have not brought excuses of what we are going through. We have brought solutions. Because at the end of the day, to the right of the equal sign has to be a better life for all. A very familiar slogan, and should be a very familiar slogan to all seated in this honorable chamber. Now, because we are committed to a better life for all, in order to achieve that, we've got to understand we are in this together. And what does that mean? It means that we rise together or we fail together. That is what it means, sir. It means that we must all put our shoulder to the plow to ensure that each and every one of us at the end of everything that we do have a better life than we had before. So again, it is about no excuses, but solutions. Because the government could throw up its hand and it could say, we had shock after shock after shock. I remember living in a country, I don't know about you, sir, but I remember living in a country where there was so much stagnation and we were told that we were in a global recession. We had to lie because it was international, because it didn't touch the entire globe, but that's a technicality. But it was excuse after excuse after excuse. No solutions, no movement, no initiatives, just a hiding behind a recession of the time. But sir, we've come to a time where we've had shock after shock after shock, and we have played shock after shock after shock. According to the member for St. Lucie, we have batted our hand. We bat our hands, sir. Now, sir, when we say a better life for all, yes, it may not be popular to hear, but we've got to facilitate those at the top. They don't need much, but we still need to facilitate them that they can expand, because that is where employment must come. Unlike the myth in Barbados that all employment should come from the government and the public sector. The reality is that we need some private sector-led growth. And in order for that public sector-led growth to occur, we have got to be in the business of facilitating those who will lead that private sector-led growth. The other thing is that we must remember the middle class. Those among us, they do need assistance as well. And we must have initiatives in place to ensure that they are cushioned, because they will be the first to tell you that we pay the most taxes in the land and gain the least benefit from it. But of course, you know where my heart is located. My heart is located with those at and below the poverty line, where they need a lot of assistance, sir. They need, yes, the money, but they also need the mindset. The mindset to elevate themselves in a social situation on the social rung ladder that we have created in this country to ensure that we have a better life for all. Now, I want to start with the government of Barbados and to kind of expand and expound on what we are doing to assist in this situation, sir. The government of Barbados has the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, there to respond for the needs of the most vulnerable in this country. We've indicated time and time again, and we have demonstrated that we are there to provide that social protection. Now, over the last few months, you've heard the minister and myself speak a lot about moving, chucking the gear, going into a different gear now, into empowerment. Because Barbados have been hailed of having one of the greatest social safety nets in the world. But if anybody in here knows about fishing, you would know that a net has holes. And because it has those holes, we've now gone to the stage where we are creating an empowerment basin. A basin without holes to ensure that we now move beyond this idea of not giving a man a fish, but giving him a fishing rod. But because we want the best for our country, we will now be moving from that fish to the fishing rod to the fleet of vessels to ensure that empowerment and wealth is brought to the citizens of Barbados, the greatest small nation on planet Earth, sir. And I am being dead serious. And I want the people in here to know, and the people out there to know, that I am being as serious as a heart attack. Now, we also have within the ministry the Strengthening Human and Social Development Program, which has taken 250 families, very impoverished, most vulnerable, through a series of programs. And that has now given us the alley-oop, if you may, sir, to ensure that as we move to 1,000 families, the 1,000 most vulnerable families in Barbados, that we can take them now from dependence on the state to independence where they can stand on their own, to interdependence where we reach the pinnacle of them now giving back to the society. So then we are not helping 1,000 families, we are helping 2,000 families because each one must reach one. And it continues, sir. It continues. Now, I did something that I promised myself to reduce doing yesterday. I went and read the comments. Now, all back in 2010, Barack Obama said, keep from the comments. Don't read the comments. And it was a little disheartening, to tell you the truth, to see the announcement the Prime Minister said we can be discussing this initiative with the social partnership, 1,000 families. I mean, oh, only 1,000? They got more than 1,000 people. It's 1,000 families, not 1,000 people. Do your multiplication, your addition, subtraction, and addition. And you would recognize that we can touch up to 8,000 persons by touching 1,000 families. And that is no small feat in Barbados. Now, I am one, I don't like to play with statistics. But the statistics are showing us that in the height of the lockdowns, the poverty in Barbados went to 19%. That is almost 20%, Honourable Member, which should tell you 1 in 5 Barbadians were below the poverty line. Totally unacceptable by any measure. That equates, sir, to about 53,000 persons in Barbados. About 7,000 families. And I just rounding off because I don't want to get into all the 0.0278s. But for me, in my experience with statistics, I am always led to pull from various sources and then look at your own experience, and you will be able to give a good judgment call of what it is that you are dealing with. Now, living, eating, sleeping, crying, the Adopt a Family program for 2 years or more, I can tell you that it is my estimation, sir, that we have just about coming out of the last lockdown and the removal of the curfew, about 25,000 persons that are in direct need of assistance, and I consider them most vulnerable, which equates to about 3,500 families. So if we as a government determine that we are going to make our contribution, and again, come back to that word, sir, through this mechanism, it is only fair that all sailors on deck put your hand to the plow, recognize that we are in these rough seas together, and we can either sail together or we can fall off and we can drown together, and we do not want a situation of who can swim, and who can't swim, drown. So it is important that we recognize, again, we are in this together, and we have to sail the ship of state, sir, with the greatest understanding that these are the times that call upon me as man and woman in these chambers, and we must therefore be equal or greater than the times, or not, history will not be very kind to us. Now, for me, all that the government is doing, there's always room for improvement. This morning, I had a conversation with the Honourable Finance Minister in terms of trying to look at our systems that we have that almost guarantee that payment is late for temporary workers, for various projects. And it has become the norm, but it doesn't mean that it is acceptable. I feel comforted and satisfied, sir, that they are working, they are not sleeping behind the wheel, in terms of finding greater and better systems to ensure that we can do better. Because it costs government to be inefficient. Inefficiency is the mother that birthed corruption. So in other words, if I go to a government department and it is so inefficient, it makes it lucrative in order to get through, to pass money under the table. If I am a temporary worker and I am not paid for 4 months, I therefore, depending on the morals and upbringing, therefore tempted to do things I otherwise would not do. But at the financial level, I know that government in this country is charged a quote-unquote stupidity tax. And what do I mean by that? I know people personally, sir, that they do work with government. And they ensure that they put a little something on the top because they know they're going to wait. They put something on the top because they know they have to wait for their money. I call it a stupidity tax. They are charging the government. But when we talk about the government and people saying the government should pay, they say hope that the people charge the government, I thought that people sue the government. Who's the government? Who got to pay? And that is why I almost think we need a language change when we talk about governance in this country. I think that when you mean cabinet, you should say a cabinet or the executive. When you mean parliament, you should say a parliament or the legislature. When you mean government workers, you should say the public sector, public servants. Because when you say government, when the cursing, they mean the people in this chamber, whether it is our fault or not. And sometimes it is not our fault, but at the end of the day, it is our responsibility. Because these same systems and these same people that act as blockades to development in this country, we have got to create methods, ways, and solutions to treat to it. If not us, who? If not us, who? Ninja man. At the end of the day, each of us must look in the mirror and ask ourselves the question, what are we willing to do and contribute to making sure that the systems that we have become enslaved to? You imagine 30 big men and women, sir, including yourself, sir, are enslaved to systems created by people long gone. Have we not the confidence, the bravery, the common sense, sir, to stand up and to make the necessary changes? Are we afraid of our shadows? I've never seen a shadow lead a man yet, but I've seen a shadow leave a man when the sun or the light have moved. And the light is telling us now, sir, that it is time to make the move, to make the corrections necessary. I am also aware that where we can do better, we have done better in some cases. We've trimmed off all the fat. I think we even cut muscle and bone too. We've trimmed, sir. When last have anyone in Barbados heard of a cost overrun? There used to be songs and choruses of cost overruns on projects galore. When last have you heard of a cost overrun? So we have done things to improve, and I think that the government and those in charge should be commensurate to that, because a cost overrun comes out of each and every Barbadian's pocket. When the Minister of Finance is reaching for the taxes, sir, he don't reach in mid-air. He don't take leaves off a tree. He comes in your pocket and mine, sir. Uninvited. He comes every time. So it is very important to note where we have done right. And we've got to answer the inertia now in the system. A colleague of mine last week, she put it so well, sir. She said we have certain senior officers in this country. They reside in 3 gears: park, neutral, and reverse. Sir, you can't get it any better than that. And that is not to say, because I understand every time you say that, you have to say A, you have to say B. There's some in turbo. There's some in 5th gear and 6th gear, they in turbo. You will know about turbo. You understand? But my concern are those who are in park, neutral, and reverse. And what are we going to do about it but lament every week? Lament every week. Because if we have done that and we come to the end of the term and we find a way to put them in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, we have failed. Full stop. We have failed. Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, sir, we have failed. And we have failed the people who have put us here to represent them, to get them in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. It is really a simple fact. It is simple reality, sir. But I come now to the business and this whole idea of the pandemic contribution levy. Many businesses are out there are doing well. They have their corporate social responsibility. I toured all the schools in my constituency on Thursday and Friday, sir. And while I'm a little disappointed that some of them are a little popped down, I am still happy to know, and I single out Republic Bank, if I may, and if I may not, just pretending they say, but Republic Bank have been making contributions to ensure that some of the school plants and some of the facilities are enhanced. So there are companies out there with their corporate social responsibility programs, and they are doing well, sir. And if I may pivot, to use a term I learned this morning, and the honourable members that know what I'm talking about. Even in the way that we treat to our public assets, we have got to recognize that we are in this together. I went to a school, I went to a nursery, not even a school. John Becker's just short there. And there is a well open, you imagine in a nursery, you can't go outside and play. You know what it is to be able to not play at that age? We got young children, sir. But I was saying you mad and saying them mad too. Of course, I have been in contact with the Ministry of Housing who assured me that it will be sorted out. But at the same time, I got to be in contact now with the Ministry of Education, my good friend, to ensure that those rusty play parks in these various schools are treated to before we go to treat somebody for tetanus. But at the end of the day, I want to commend some of the teachers who've ensured that no matter what they had to withstand through this pandemic, that they came back and they came back like a roaring fire. I went and meet some of the infants, and the teacher asked them, class, we cooking with what? And sir, we cooking with gas. Because they have been able to catch up all that time that they would have left off. They come to school a little earlier. They leave a little later, and the teacher is engaging the parents. And that is an example of being in this together, where you have corporate society, you have the parents, the PTA, the businesses, everybody coming together and recognizing that we will sail together or we will sink and drown together. So I now pivot back to the business sector. Now, what am I asking for the business sector? I am asking in cases where you can increase your corporate social responsibility and programs, please, for goodness sake, do so. In cases where you can lower your profit margin, lower the profit margin in cases where you can. Because I am not oblivious to the fact, I'm not uncaring that some of them have health strain. Some of them, they've gone through the same challenges with logistics, supply chain issues, costs, prices increasing. But I know some that have operated at the same level, taking in the same level of profit, or even more. All I am asking for, sir, all I am asking for is in the event where you see that profit still flowing in, like honey and milk, please, you don't want a laxative, release a little ink on the edges. That's all we ask. Because some of them have cut and contrived, they've cut the hours down to the minimum, they've sent home the workers at the first sign of trouble, they've cut salaries unceremoniously. Sir, they've done the dog. And at the end of the day, they're not touching our profit margin. All I am asking, sir, please understand that when there's unrest in this country, that the unrest will touch us all. I have seen people, ordinary Barbadians, just moving to the bread shop and not getting back home. Ain't nothing to do with you. Ain't nothing to do with her. When unrest touches a nation, it does not have the name of persons written on it. It touches each and every one of us, if not directly, indirectly. It is not a threat. It is a fact. Get involved and understand that we are in this together. So I want to close by speaking now and turning to, obviously through you, to the citizens. But before I do so, when I see the word contribution coming from government, even in a former place, see a microphone in front of me, but a former place, I had to explain to Barbadians what a contribution levy is. And sometimes people think it is a technicality. Why the taxing me and my garbage ain't getting collect? Don't have garbage and sewage tax that they call it, and it's a contribution, garbage and sewage contribution. Why hook up to sewage? Why the taxing me? Was the cry. And I would have to explain to them that we live in a country together, and there is sewage, the hard sewage on the road on the south coast. You go down to the south coast, but yes, you're making a contribution to it. You don't go down to the south coast, you spend us dollars for us to bring in things here though, you just get something from that, so make a contribution to it. You understand? You just drive all around Barbados, you see it clean, right? The garbage getting collect, right? You live in a clean country. You don't got an outbreak of rodents, mosquitoes, dengue, leptospirosis. Well, you're making a contribution to it. All the Minister of Finance are asking, based on your profit during the time of the pandemic height, you've made some healthy profits. Please make a contribution. With that's elementary there, Watson. And then this idea of I heard of them talking about retroactive. It's not retroactive, it's historical. What you're doing is using historical data. We're not going back and taxing you going forward. Master, come on. We are in this together. I think you should be proud. You should be happy. You should be running up to the Treasury to say, Minister of Finance, could I pay more? Is this all I can pay? Can I make a little extra on the top? And of course, the Minister of Finance will answer in the affirmative. I know him well. But Mr. Speaker, sir, the onus now is really on the citizens themselves. I cannot leave them out of this because we are in this together. You must be asked at the end of the day to contribute, to cut where you can. I know we grew up here about cut and contrive. Some can't cut anymore and some can't tighten the belt or to cut in half. That is just a reality, and the Ministry of People Empowerment, we are here for those. But those of you, and if you don't know about adjustment, and that's why we talk about the mindset, we've got to put our public relations in order that we can speak to the people and tell them how to cut and contrive. A lot of people complain, what is like bill so high? They go on 3 TVs on CBC and 5 radios on VOB and then go in and come back. I complain about the light bill. You open the fridge 10,000 times a day and you complain about the light bill. Why don't be in your house? You don't open your fridge, you don't turn on these TVs. You're buying this breakfast snack, I ain't gonna call the name. $16 to $23, no nutritional value whatsoever. Ain't even taste so good anyhow. But you're buying 5 and 6 boxes. We have got to adjust to the times that we are in. And that is why the message must go over to citizens that you are in this, that we in this together. You are in that together when we talk about together. This is not for the bourgeoisies and the oligarchs. This is for everybody, including the citizens of this country. Now, the foundations and the diasporas they have made me proud. The Minister of Finance spoke just a few minutes ago through the Adult Family Program. Many of them here in Barbados and abroad contributed up to $5 million, almost $5 million. And I knew it could have been more because if we kept up the kind of like the public service announcements, I'm sure, because when the public service announcements went down, the money went down too. So sure, if we have kept that up, sir, we would have gone even more. But what I'm asking at the end of the day is that we be willing to understand this country has done so much for us. The roads that we drive on, the communication that we use, the schools that we went to, the desks that we sat by and the chairs that we sat in, and the teachers that gave us instructions. The country has done so much for us. I don't want to end with an American president, but allow me. And John Kennedy, he asked not what my country can do for me, but in these times, what can I do for my country, for we are in this together. Sir, I thank you.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a tough act to follow one of my former students, a student of mathematics, and I'm not going to give the story again. But this morning, Mr. Speaker, as I listened to the Honourable Member of Parliament for the city, I couldn't help but agree with every single thing that he said. He's touched on the role or a role for companies. He's touched on a role for employees. He's touched on a role for the self-employed. He's touched on a role for the average citizen. The role that we must all play in assisting our country, not only in mitigation, in recovery, in resilience, but a fundamental that I'm sure that all of us in here grew up on, at least all of us who attended Sunday school, being our brother's keeper. And I reflect on the introduction that was given to us in this house this morning by the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance. He touched on a number of important things, and he touched on a number of important reasons for the pandemic levy that this bill speaks to in particular. But I want to narrow my focus, the focus of my contribution, on a few areas. This levy is being imposed. That's the first thing that I had to take note of. It is being imposed. And why do you have to impose things, even when there are desirable things? There's need for imposition when there is not a natural tendency for people to do the things that they know are right. For people to do the things that would lead to all of the positive consequences that the former speaker spoke of. For people who are in positions to do more, to give more, is not natural for everybody to do. So the first thing I noted is that, like any other levy, this is an imposition, but it's for a good purpose, mitigating the adverse economic effects of the spread of the coronavirus. Then I reflected on what the bill tells us about, and the fact that if people who are required to pay this pandemic levy don't pay, then there are measures in place to deal with it. And I scroll down through the bill to what measures there are in place. And I see reference, Mr. Speaker, to a penalty of $500 for any breach. And that's $500 to a company, to a self-employed person, or to an employer. $500 plus an interest rate of 1% calculated for each month. And I reflected when I looked at the penalties further on two things. One, that the same institution that is going to be responsible for monitoring enforcement and verifying that companies, self-employed persons, and employers honor their commitment under the bill that will soon become an act, is the same company that has to enforce and monitor VAT payments and income tax. And then I reflected secondly on the fact that all we are talking about as a penalty is $500 plus the same 1% interest that is in place for people who don't pay the taxes and the VAT and the other things. And why am I highlighting this? Why am I seeing this as a concern? Because if we have similar penalties in place for other taxes that are not being collected, and we still have outstanding as much money as we do in uncollected taxes, it tells you that something in the system is not as effective as it ought to be. Something in the system is not working. I imagine that this government, coming into its first term in government in 2018, ought to have, done an assessment on all the monies that were due to government in the form of taxes and, as it relates to the National Insurance Scheme, for instance, in the form of contributions owed. I am sure the government did its own assessments. My intelligence tells me that the amounts owed exceed $1 billion. Now we have the minister in the Ministry of Finance that may or may not be, ought to be in a position to corroborate the findings of my intelligence. And this causes me concern. It causes me concern because we have had to impose another form of tax, because that's what levy is in simple terms. We've had to impose another form of tax to collect monies to help us through a crisis when available to government in terms of outstanding monies would be VAT to be collected, income tax to be collected, contributions, employer contributions to be paid that have not been paid in. And why am I going here? Not only to show that there ought to have been monies available to tie us over through difficult times, and that even if a pandemic levy had become necessary, that levy could be building on top of what there was a healthier position to do more to contribute to the social programs that we heard being mentioned by the Honourable Member for the City and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance. But it also means that our institutions in public administration would not be struggling to the extent that they are today. And I had to ponder this, Mr. Speaker, because whilst the pandemic levy, and I support the bill before this House, while it is a good thing, it is a desirable thing. And while government is certainly playing shot after shot, it is also telling me that whilst we are doing many things well, we are missing the boat on a number of key things. If this government, especially a government that has had to lead through the COVID-19 pandemic, a government who has had to lead through a hurricane, a government that has had to lead through the freak storm, the things that we normally refer to, and the government that is leading through a number of other existential threats that we always refer to. If this government is leading through and is only looking at plasters to patch a few sores and not dealing with the underlying cracks and crevices in our system, this government is also failing. It's failing itself and it's failing our people. I'm reminded as I say this of the words of my father, not only of pleasant memory, that there is always a better best. So even when you're doing your best, even when you're doing good, there is always more to which you must aspire. So while we appreciate the efforts of this government, as we have realized in its attempts to balance mitigation and recovery through this and other mechanisms that other speakers have referred to time after time, I can't help but wonder, Mr. Speaker, if all this was absolutely necessary. And if my intelligence is correct and there is actually over $1 billion that could be owed in unpaid taxes, I want us to think of what that $1 billion could do today. I wonder if we have considered if we focus more on enforcement and collection, if we would not find ourselves as a government and in a country in a better place. And that's a rhetorical statement that I make when I say I wonder if, because of course, unlike the Honourable Member of Parliament for the City, I am not going to focus any efforts on pleading with people to engage in good corporate social responsibility. I've spent the last 2 weeks alongside the Honourable Minister of Labor, attending a conference at the International Labor Organization, where we both participated in a discussion that led towards some conclusions for the ILO after 103 years around the importance of the social and solidarity economy. And one of the major distinctions that came out of that discussion, which separated institutions or entities, if you may, in the social and solidarity economy and other enterprises, is the fact that their intrinsic nature is values-driven. They're not about profits. They're about putting people over profits. When you appeal to enterprises, they're interested in people over profits. Corporate social responsibility is done because companies want to look good in the eyes of potential customers and existing customers who will probably engage them even more and contribute more to the bottom line and so on. They're not essentially about values. If there were about values, we wouldn't have to be debating what we are debating here, an imposition of a levy. It would have come so naturally that a government would not have to ask. But these are the very people that the Honourable Member of Parliament for the city are appealing to give a little more, are the very people who don't even do the things that they ought to do. And you're appealing to them to exercise a social conscience, even in a time of crisis, and do the things that they don't have to do. Member of Parliament for the city, I hear your pleadings. And if you have oxygen to waste, I suggest that you continue to do so. But I'm suggesting further that a responsible government has the obligation to collect what is due. A number of these companies are asking, appealing for some consideration with the VAT that I owe. At the same time, they're asking for more facilitation. At the same time, these are among the ones that if you don't beg and plead, they won't see an employee struggling and see that person as a real person with needs and try to help them over the hump. These are the ones that use COVID. Many of them, not all, and let me clarify that, not all. These are the ones, many of whom have used the very pandemic to do the things that they felt they ought to have done to expand profit margins during the crisis, so that post-COVID, profit margins will have the potential then to do so, get bigger. So why am I going here? Because I heard the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance make reference to what unions are asking for, salary increases and wage increases at this time. And of course, he stopped short of saying anything further. I was interested to hear where he would be going. Because the very workers that are asking for these things that we consider might be unrealistic are the workers in some of these ministries where they're seeing, and don't take a ministry, take BRA for instance, the Barbados Revenue Authority. Some of these workers are working in these areas where they are seeing requests made for forgiveness and requests being granted. They're working in these areas where they are seeing amounts due to be collected year after year after year after year after year and not being collected, but seeing concession after concession after concession. So it's a natural thing, therefore, that if I, as the small man, as the small fish, want a little extra more, I have a basis upon which to ask it. If government in its public administration system is extending the hand of fellowship with a person or entity that is less in need than I am. And it's the messages that we send. It's the messages that we send that we have to be careful of. If at no other time in our history, post-independence, that we should have seen the importance and the real importance of social protection and social security, it should have been during the crisis, where a number of people who didn't even contribute into the social security system, but for the generosity of a government, would have found themselves in positions more vulnerable than that which confronted them during the pandemic. And that's why a major beef of mine is that successive administrations in government would be administering over a system that recognizes that people are not doing what they're supposed to do, that would have laws in place to enforce sanctions against organizations and people who refuse to do what they're supposed to do. And we will speak in broad terms of all the measures that we will put in place to correct it. And when you trace back through history, you can't see much in terms of implementation that has led towards a narrowing of the gap. And the question that bothers my mind, why is it so? Why is it so hard to do? And Mr. Speaker, I am speaking like this as a part of a government that I have observed doing a lot of things that it should do. And if a government that has been given the responsibility twice, not once, but all, cannot do the things and cannot make the corrections, cannot close the gaps on the fundamental things of importance, then I don't have hope that I will see it in my lifetime. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have heard about amnesties being extended, periods of amnesty where you could come in and we would forgive interest and all that. These are good things that you do to encourage collection. But I'm suggesting, Mr. Speaker, that we have to move beyond the words so that after the period of amnesty is up and people are still not paying up, that we move into enforcing what the law provides for. And if the law doesn't provide for enough, then we come in here and make sure that we bring amendments to give teeth to the law, so that we as a country won't have to be scrambling and hearing the nuisance comments following the imposition of the 1%, in particular on companies. And I turn now to the imposition on individuals. I've heard the honourable member for the city in his submission as well lament the fact that the middle income levels feel that they're the ones who pay the taxes and who get the less out of everything. And when you consider the salary $6,250 of an individual in our society, you don't even know how far down or far up the middle income level that is. And you're not being ungrateful for what you have, but $6,250 don't carry you that far. And 1%, a 1% levy that is imposed is clearly felt on these income groups. But guess what? A person making $6,250 a month is likely also in a household supporting a lot of other household members who are not even working. That's the reality. That is the reality that not only COVID has thrown us into, but that was the reality of many even before COVID, but made worse on account of the pandemic. So when we look at the imposition on the individual and what we determine might be a middle class income, we have to look at the household impact too of that imposition and understand the measure of sacrifice that is being made. And I said at the start that I support it, and I still support it. But when you have to make this level of sacrifice, when you have to dig deep to make this measure of sacrifice for those who you recognize among you and around you are less fortunate, and you are seeing companies that can do better and ought to be doing better, not doing better, and getting the proverbial pat on the wrist, how does it register in your mind regarding what a government ought to be doing for you that it is not doing for you? And sometimes in here we get angry. Some of us get angry. And we feel that people are being unreasonable because we are doing so much. We are doing so many good things and they're not seeing it. But the reasons why people are not seeing it and not connecting to it relate to all of the issues that I have mentioned and a number of other issues. So I am not here opposing this pandemic levy. I said twice already that I support it. But I'm here to appeal to the members of Parliament, many of whom have different important decision-making roles in public administration, not to let your term in office end unless you narrow the gaps on some of these very large cracks in the public administration system, especially as it relates to enforcement. Mr. Speaker, at the same time that we are recovering from a pandemic, we are in the face of a war that is not in Barbados, it is not in the Caribbean, but a war that is being felt by all of us in other countries across the world, a war that is impacting logistics, is therefore impacting our ability to secure food. It's impacting energy prices and fuel costs. It is having a direct impact on us, and it is having an indirect impact on us as well. The capacity of our people to survive, and we make references to make sure that everybody can keep their head above water. The capacity of our people to survive still has to be the concern of this government through targeted policies for the most vulnerable. We discussed the recent 1,000 household or 1,000 family program. We have had introduction in education and training, even now, the construction gateway, and so on that we are talking about, and many more things that people expect government to do. And the question is, where does the money come from? I'm not going to repeat a lot of what I've said. I think I've made the point. And what am I saying in summary? That an inclusive policy is needed. An integrated and comprehensive response is needed. If we are going to recover from this crisis and build back better, it requires not only the little bits like the pandemic levy, but the things that we have that are systemic, that we have not been addressing on a day-to-day basis. The collection of outstanding money through taxes and employer-owed contributions to the national insurance. These are the things that require us, that require you, the ones in the executive decision-making, to acknowledge and address the real cracks in the system. And we must do so decisively if indeed we are to ensure that we leave no one behind. And if indeed we are to ensure that we are presiding over a society where we live our commitment that the weakest among us will be supported by the strongest among us. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that we take a very brief suspension for 5 minutes.
The question is, this honourable chair be suspended for 5 minutes. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This chamber stands suspended for 5 minutes.